All right, so this game is a little bit different from your usual kind of game. Now, at the outset, it starts off kind of simple. We essentially have mostly a sequencing setup. We have 5 slots to keep track of here, and we can set that up accordingly. Essentially, we have a newsletter, and the newsletter is going to have 5 slots in it. And into those slots, we're effectively going to have to assign features. Now, the features themselves happen to be F, I, M, and T. We have finance, industry, marketing, and tech. Now, the thing is, though, when it comes to these features, we do have to have, we're told, at least 3 features in the newsletter, but each of these features may or may not take up several slots. So arguably, you could have a single feature that, for example, will take up positions 1 and 2, and then another 2 features that take up, positions somewhere between 3, 4, and 5. Or you could even have a single feature take up 3 slots, 1, 2, and 3, and then 4 and 5 would have to have 2 independent features. Now, if one of these features takes up several slots, that's still just a single feature, and it's worth recognizing, right? So if a single feature goes across positions 1 and 2, that doesn't make it 2 different features, or it doesn't take up kind of 2 of the 3 features that we need. That is still a single feature that simply goes across 2 different slots. Further complicating this is that we're not limited to just one feature of each type. So for example, we could arguably have several finance features or several industry, well, not industry, they tell us this later on, but several marketing features or several tech features. And if you have several features, for example, of finance, those could be separate features. So as an example, in a given setup, we could potentially have, let's say, finance in positions 1 and 2, and this could be a single feature. Or alternatively, we actually could just as easily have finance in 1 and 2 as 2 separate features. In other words, when we have several features of the same type, those don't have to be the same single feature. They could be separate features or not. So that's just something that you kind of juggle in this game. So from there, I guess let's take a look at the rules themselves. So the first rule tells us that any feature that occupies more than one slot must occupy consecutive slots. Now, that's the kind of rule, to be honest, I would personally just kind of keep in mind. Essentially, if a single feature goes across several different slots, you can't jump around. So you can't have a feature that occupies slots 1 and 3, but not slot 2. If a single feature occupies several slots, then it's going to have to be consecutive. So it's going to have to be something like 1 and 2, or 1, 2, and 3, or so on and so forth. Now, that said, we could still have separate features of the same thing that are not consecutive. That's a different story. So for example, if you were to have something like finance in 1, that's a single feature, and finance in 3, that's a single feature, that's fine because those are 2 separate features. But you could not have kind of finance in 1 and then continuing into 3. In other words, if you have a single feature that spans across several slots, those slots will have to be consecutive. Onwards. The second rule now tells us that if an issue has finance or tech, then finance or tech has to go into 1. So I guess we can just do this as a conditional statement. If you have F or T, then you must have F or T in position number 1. Now, that's not to say that it has to be the same one of F or T. So if you have F somewhere, for example, you could have T in 1, or if you have T somewhere, you could have F in 1. But basically, if there is an F or a T anywhere on the board, then one of F or T has to go into that first position. Next, an issue can have at most 1 industry feature. So I guess we can say there is a maximum of 1 industry feature. But again, notice the wording is very specific here. We're allowed a maximum of 1 industry feature, but that's not necessarily just 1 slot. In other words, we could have industry span across several different slots and still be a singular feature. So for example, you could have industry in 1 and 2 respectively, and as long as this is 1 feature, then we're still okay. But we can't have 2 separate industry features. Now, one thing I actually forgot to mention, we do have one more nuance here. You are allowed to have slots without any features at all. So in other words, we can also have graphics somewhere on the board, and that graphics are just basically placeholders. They're just places where you do not have a feature. Now, again, we do know that we have to have, I guess, of these guys, a minimum of 3 features. So I guess we can say that at least 3 of the slots at a minimum are going to be taken up, because we could have 3 features, each of which is only 1 slot, and then you can have 2 graphics. So at least 3 of the slots are going to have something, or potentially more. In terms of minimums and maximums, that's really the only restriction, that we have to have 3 features, but we don't have to have 1 of each type. We could have arguably 3 features that are all the same type. There's really little restriction on that. So from there, I guess let's take a look at the questions themselves. So question number 19 says, which of the following could be a good setup for the newsletter? So this is our standard exclusion question, so we do these by the rules. Now the first rule told us that any feature that has more than 1 slot has to have consecutive slots. So let's take a look and see if anything violates that. So answer choice A, looks like all of them are just single slot features, so we're good. Answer choice B, these look like single slot features as well, so that's fine. Answer choice C has multiple slot features, so we have 1 and 2 are industry and 3 and 4 are marketing, which is fine, right? They're consecutive, no big deal there. Answer choice D looks okay as well. We have a multi-slot feature, but that's 2 and 3, those are consecutive. Answer choice E has multi-slot feature in 2 and 4, and that doesn't work. We can't have 2 and 4 be a single marketing feature because multiple slot features have to be consecutive. So that essentially disqualifies E from the board. Next, we're told that if you have F or T, then you have to have them in position 1. So answer choice A has F in 1, so that's by default going to work. Answer choice B, you'll notice, has technology in 2, but you don't have one of F or T in 1, so B certainly wouldn't work then. Next, answer choice C has, actually, you'll notice that answer choice C has finance in slot number 5, but we don't have an F or an T in 1, so that would effectively disqualify C from the board. And then answer choice D has T in 1, which by default would work. Next, lastly, we're only allowed 1 industry feature, so let's take a look. Answer choice A has 2 industry features, right? They explicitly say that slot 3 is a second industry feature, so answer choice A certainly does not work. And then that leaves us with answer choice D, which only has 1 industry feature, so that's all good. So the best answer to question number 19 then becomes answer choice D. Next, so the first local question that we have here happens to be question number 20, so let's take a look and see what we can do with it. So number 20 rather, if an issue of the newsletter has no tech feature, and if there is a finance feature that occupies slots 4 and 5. So for this scenario, effectively, we can say that there's not going to be any tech. And moreover, we're going to have a finance feature that spans across positions 4 and 5. And as we said, that is a singular finance feature. Now, that second rule now comes into play, right? Because we know that if you have a finance or a tech, and obviously we have finance right now, then one of those two has to be in position 1, except we know that if you don't have any tech in this scenario right now, then that first position is going to have to be finance. Now, this actually doesn't have to be the entirety of the feature, right? So presumably this could be just an isolated feature in itself, or it could span across 1 and 2 as well. We actually don't quite know that. We're also going to have 1 more feature on the board, but we don't know who that, we just know that it can't be tech, but arguably it could be anybody else. So the question itself now asks which of the following is required, what must be true for this scenario. Answer choice A, a finance feature occupies slot 1. Well, actually, yeah, we did just say that, didn't we? A finance feature would have to go into position number 1. Best answer to question number 20 then becomes answer choice A. Next, number 21. So this one's a global question. We'll come back to that one in just a second. Let's go ahead to question number 22, our next local question. So number 22 says, if in a particular issue, slot number 1 is occupied by the only industry feature in that issue. So apparently, in this scenario, number 1 is going to be occupied by an industry feature. Again, it's worth noting that we don't know that this is necessarily the complete feature. This could actually expand over to position number 2 as well. That said, though, obviously we're only allowed one industry feature, and as the question said, that's basically in position number 1. So the question now becomes, what does that mean for us? Well, first of all, we know that we can no longer have F or T in number 1, obviously, because we have I there, right? Which means that if we can't have F or T, then there's no way to have F or T at all. Because if we did have F or T, then you would have had to have one of them in number 1. So we can actually say that in this scenario, we're not going to be allowed either F or T to exist. Now, that said, though, we only have, in fact, per the question and per the rule, we're only allowed one industry feature, but we do have to have at least 3, and then F and T are out of the question, which means that the other 2 features really can only be marketing. Marketing is the only one left over. So we know that effectively we're going to have 2 marketing features somewhere on the board. Now, to be fair, we don't really know exactly where. There's almost complete flexibility here. We also don't know whether they're going to be single slot or multiple slot features, so that's wide open. But we definitely, at the very least, know that right now we're going to have 2 marketing features somewhere on the board. Now, the question itself is asking which of the following is required for this situation. Let's hope we have enough information to answer this. So, answer choice A says, there is an industry feature that occupies slots 1 and 2 and only those slots. Well, we definitely have industry in 1, but we don't really know that it has to go into 2. This could just be a single slot feature. So this doesn't seem like it would have to be true. We can, I guess, get rid of A for now. Answer choice B, there's an industry feature that occupies slots 1, 2, and 3. I mean, same kind of problem. I mean, we could potentially have I go across 1, 2, and 3. We could have a 3-slot feature, and then the 2 marketing would go into 4 and 5. But there's nothing that suggests that that has to happen. I mean, I could just be in 1 or it could just be in 2. So that would seem to disqualify B. C, there is a marketing feature that occupies slots 2 or 3 or both. So I guess, do we have to have a marketing in 2 or 3? Well, no, in fact, we actually just said we could have potentially even had I, the industry feature, go across 1, 2, and 3. And the marketing could fall into 4 and 5 quite easily. So there certainly doesn't seem like that has to be the case that marketing is in 2 or 3, because we could have marketing instead in 4 and 5. So C doesn't seem like it would have to be true. Next, answer choice D. There is a marketing feature that occupies 1 or more of 2, 3, and 4. So I guess, do we have to have marketing in 2, 3, or 4? Well, the thing is, we did say that we have to have 2 marketing features right now, right? And there's certainly no way to fit both of the marketing features in position 5. So arguably, we actually would have to have at least 1 marketing feature somewhere between positions 2, 3, and 4, in which case this actually would have to be true. D is viable. Just in case, let's take a look at E. There's a marketing feature that occupies 3 or 5. Well, no, we could arguably have 2 independent marketing features in 2 and 4, so we don't have to have them in 3 or 5, right? Because as long as the 2 marketing features are independent, which they are, they don't have to be consecutive, so we could have them in 2 and 4, so E doesn't have to be true. The best answer to question number 22 then becomes D. Next, number 23, you'll notice, is a global question as well, so we're going to come back to that one since we'll just do the global questions in order now. So question number 21 says, which of the following is not allowed for an issue of the newsletter? So what can we essentially never have? So answer choice A, there is exactly 1 industry feature and it occupies slot number 1. Well, we've actually seen that right here, right? That was actually the previous question. We could easily have an industry feature and it could be in number 1. In fact, that industry feature could even span across several slots or just 1 slot, but that easily could happen. So answer choice A easily gets disqualified. That would seem like it could be true. Next, answer choice B. There's exactly 1 finance feature and it occupies slot 2. Arguably, we've actually effectively seen that opportunity as well, because in this first scenario, arguably, couldn't we have easily had finance go across positions 1 and 2, in which case, I mean, we could have something different here, and then you can have 2 finance features there, or not. You could even just have finance in 1 and 2, or just finance in 2. That doesn't seem like there's any real restriction on this, so this would certainly seem like it could happen, not that it can't. Next, answer choice C. There's exactly 1 tech feature and it occupies slot number 3. Well, arguably, if we have exactly 1 tech feature and it's in number 3, I mean, the only real restriction that it would create is that if we have tech, then it would have to also have F or T in number 1. But that seems pretty easy, doesn't it? I mean, couldn't we at least seemingly easily do something like put tech in here? We could put another different tech feature, or we could put just F in here instead. I mean, this seems very open. Arguably, we could even run this tech feature across all three positions, 1, 2, and 3, and have two separate features in 2 and 5. So again, this doesn't seem like there's any reason that this couldn't happen. So answer choice C is out. Next, answer choice D. Each feature except the feature in slot number 1 is finance or marketing. So could we have everything except the feature that occupies number 1 be finance and marketing? Or rather, finance or marketing. Well, finance is a little bit more restrictive, but even then we can kind of pull that off, couldn't we? So couldn't we have something like, let's say, finance in 4 and 5 as separate features, and then tech goes into number 1, so we've resolved this restriction as well. It is worth noting that this answer choice is a little bit cryptic because it does actually say that each feature except the feature that occupies slot number 1. So that implicitly does say that there would have to be something in slot number 1. But yeah, we could still make it work, couldn't we? If we have something in slot number 1, we could easily have everything else be finance or marketing. So for example, we could have even one of each. Let's say finance goes here, marketing goes here. There doesn't seem to be anything wrong with this, and then tech goes in there, in which case we're good to go. Lastly, answer choice E. Each feature except the feature that occupies slot number 5 is industry or marketing. So could we have everything except for slot number 5 be industry or marketing? So again, implicitly that says that there has to be something in slot number 5. Now, to be honest, I actually kind of have an issue with this particular answer choice in this question in general. So we're first going to kind of take LSAC's intended interpretation of this, and then we'll kind of talk about the issue that we see with this. But for this answer choice, I guess the intent is to say that if everything else except for slot number 5 is either industry or marketing, I guess we could have, let's say, industry and marketing in other places. But that would mean that the feature that's in number 5, what would this have to be? If everything else is industry or marketing, then this one is left to be either, arguably, F or T. So we could have an F or a T here, except the problem is if we have an F or a T here, then effectively we would have to have everything else be I or M, except if we have F or T in number 5, then we're going to have one of F or T in number 1. Which means it's impossible for everything else to be I or M, because as soon as you have F or T in number 5, then one of those two is going to be in number 1. Now, if you did have issues with this particular answer choice, you might have run into trouble because the wording here is a little bit misleading. When the answer choice says every feature except the feature that occupies slot number 5, strictly speaking, that's not actually saying anything about slot number 5. All it's really saying is that the other slots are going to be industry or marketing, but that doesn't stop number 5 from also being industry or marketing, right? If you do this mechanically, the word except generally means just if not. So outside of number 5, this answer choice is saying is that everything else has to be industry or marketing. In fact, there's other games that LSAC has placed before in which that's exactly the expectation that they had in terms of how you interpret this statement. So there's a bit of a certain uncertainty here. So again, let's just kind of recap that. If you interpret this as saying that everything else is I or M, then this is really not a valid answer choice because that leaves open the possibility that number 5 could be one of I or M as well, in which case this could easily be true. That means that number 5 wouldn't have had to be one of F or T. The intended interpretation for this particular question by LSAC, though, seems to be to say that when you claim that everything except for number 5 is I or M, that means that 5 can't be I or M, which is certainly questionable. That said, though, this is just an ambiguity that I guess LSAC expected you to account for, so it is what it is. Next, so the best answers here still ends up being answer choice E, and I guess we can move on to question number 23. Any of the following is allowed for an issue of the newsletter, except, so once again, what cannot possibly happen? Answer choice A. There's exactly one finance feature and no industry or marketing feature. So could we have exactly one finance and no industry and no marketing? Well, arguably speaking, as long as we have finance and tech, then we're still fine. In fact, couldn't we have one finance and then two tech features? Yeah, that seems like it could easily work. As long as one of them is in position number one, then we're actually quite all right. Answer choice B, there's exactly one industry feature and no finance or marketing. Well, if you have exactly one industry and no finance or marketing, that means that the other ones would have to be tech. But we could do that, right? As long as tech is in number one, then we're still fine because that would still fulfill that first rule. Next, there's exactly one industry feature and no marketing or tech feature. Well, if there's exactly one industry and no marketing or tech, that means that the other two features are going to have to be finance, which again is okay because as long as one of those finance features is in the first position, then we're still fine. Next, answer choice D, there's exactly one marketing feature and no finance and no tech. Well, if there's one marketing and there's no finance and no tech, that would mean that the other two features would have to be industry. Except wait a minute, we're only allowed to have one industry feature, right? Like this rule still really applies, which means if there's only one marketing feature and there's no finance and no tech, there's actually no way to get your minimum of 3 features on the board because you're only left with one other industry feature and then nothing else, which means it's impossible to have exactly one marketing feature and then to have no finance and no tech, because then there's no way to get up to 3 features with only one more industry. So the best answer to question number 23 is answer choice D.